Ukraine claims it destroyed Russian bombers worth billions of dollars in a large-scale drone assault on enemy soil as it geared up for talks with Moscow counterparts to explore prospects for a ceasefire.
President Zelensky claimed that Ukraine's Operation Spider Web destroyed Russian bombers worth at least $7 billion in its most long-range operation of the war yet. Kiev claims that the deep strikes inside Russian territory named Operation Spider Web was planned for over a year. According to Ukraine's security service, SBU, the operation itself was personally overseen by President Zelensky and executed by SBU chief Vasyl Malyuk using FPV drones.
According to reports quoting a Ukraine security official, the drones were hidden under the roofs of small wooden houses. These mobile homes were then transported to trucks on trucks. Once in place, the roofs were opened remotely, releasing a swarm of drones that struck the airfields simultaneously.
An eyewitness video showed drones flying out of a truck parked near Russia's Belaya Air Base. Ukraine targeted strategic nuclear bombers in Belaya Air Base in Siberia, Ivanovo Air Base northeast of Moscow, and Dyagilevo base that is located south of Moscow, which also came under attack. A huge explosion also rocked the Russian Arctic city of Severomorsk, which is home to Russia's largest fleet of nuclear submarines. Ukraine also hit Olenya Guba naval base in Murmansk region.
In its strikes, Ukraine claims to have struck Russia's strategic bomber fleet, A-50 early warning planes, Tu-95 strategic bombers, and Tu-22 M3 long-range attack aircraft. According to Ukraine, Russia's multiple nuclear bombers were rendered useless, and 41 aircraft were damaged or destroyed, reports say, at the Olenya airfield near the Arctic Circle. Drones were launched directly from a truck parked at a gas station.
Russia's defense ministry confirmed on Telegram that several of its military aircraft caught fire, adding that there were no casualties and that several participants had been arrested. In response, the Russian side claimed a strike on a training ground in Ukraine. In a rare admission of its military losses, the Ukrainian army said that the strike had killed a dozen soldiers. The attack led Ukrainian ground forces commander Mikhailo Drapati to announce his resignation.
Earlier, Russia had claimed that a blast brought down a road bridge in the Bryansk region bordering Ukraine on Saturday, derailing a passenger train heading to Moscow and killing 7 people. A separate rail bridge in the neighboring Kursk region was blown up hours later in the early hours of Sunday, derailing a freight train and injuring the driver. Authorities did not say who was behind the explosions, but investigators said a criminal inquiry was underway.
Both attacks took place in the Russian territory of Kursk and Bryansk. Kursk is a region where the Ukrainian forces had penetrated through Russian borders last August in 2024. Bryansk borders the Sumy region of Ukraine.
Now, the recent escalation came at a delicate moment. 3 years into the war, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday that he was sending a delegation to Istanbul led by his defense minister Rustem Umerov for talks on Monday with Russian officials. Turkey is hosting the meeting, which was spurred by U.S. President Donald Trump's push for a quick deal to end the 3-year war.
The Russian delegation led by presidential aide Vladimir Medinsky arrived in Istanbul on Sunday evening to take part in talks face-to-face with the Ukrainian side.
And to discuss more, we're now being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He is a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's begin with these attacks. Now, as reports say, they were prepared for more than a year. Of course, it was expansive. Drones were smuggled and the attack was carried out under President Zelensky's operation. Now, these attacks were so meticulously planned. How do you assess Ukraine, of course, and Russia's capabilities in these attacks, and how does this change the face of the war at this juncture?
Well, first of all, let's just look at the skill that went into conducting these operations. It used a great deal of what's called operational security to keep it silent. I'm sure that they probably had very limited exposure even among the allies whether that's Great Britain, France, Germany, the United States, even allegedly that we weren't even involved with any of this or didn't even have any knowledge of it beforehand. So that by itself is a real feat. And then the technology that went into having this done with the satellite remotes, with the remote opening of the trucks themselves, the getting them to where they need to go, absolutely a picture perfect strategic operation on the Ukraine side. That being said, what matters in a war is not individual acts, but how things contribute toward either winning or losing a war. And this is going to have probably no impact at all on the conduct of the war, even depending on how many bombers were actually hit. There's disputes about whether it was 40 or maybe even 9. It's unclear what's actually, but it was a significant number. The problem is, for Ukraine, Russia has a lot more of them. And the number that they use in any given sortie or attack mission into Ukraine is probably around a dozen, maybe less than that. So there's plenty to replace those, so that won't affect at all the Russian fire that's coming into the Ukraine side. Worse, probably, this all comes the day before the peace talks are supposed to start in Istanbul tomorrow, and this will not play well for the Ukraine side. If anything, this is going to drive Russia into harder position, and on the battlefield, the Ukraine side is losing. So I'm not sure how this is going to help them long term.
Lieutenant Colonel, you've answered one of the big queries that I had. It was tactical brilliance that the entire world saw in terms of those visuals, but how strategically wise was it? That's something you've addressed in your response. Going into the talks into Istanbul, do you feel that Ukraine is taking the right approach to bring Russia to the negotiating table at this point? Because if history tells us anything, this will only hamper any kind of peace talks which were perhaps on the horizon in Istanbul.
The bottom line to any kind of negotiation, who has the leverage, who has the power to compel the other side to concede to their issues? And there's no question that all of the cards are on the Russian side. When you're talking about air power, air defense, manpower, technological, industrial capacity, etc., all off the charts on the Russian side. The only area where there is parity is in the drone fight right now. And I've talked to people on both sides of the line of contact, and both of them say the same thing, that there's parity with that. But if all the other advantages, and especially manpower advantages, are on the Russian side, and they literally had millions more men from which to draw, a war of attrition can only work against Ukraine. So if you're not willing to come to a negotiated settlement and make some real concessions at these negotiation talks, then their UN ambassador, Nebenzia, in the UN Security Council just a few days ago, clearly and unequivocally said Russia will continue to fight if they don't get the negotiated settlement that they're looking for. So they've been pretty plain about what they're going to do, and I imagine we'll see something like that play out.
Right, and also talking about these talks, U.S.'s role was really evident when they actually told Trump, he was on a phone call with Putin and Zelensky saying that let's come to the table. U.S. played a role there to get these meetings done in Turkey. How do you think U.S. will be reacting to all of this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, frankly, because you had the United States from about the middle of April on talking about how that we could be days away from walking if the two sides don't come together, and the two sides definitely have not come together. They're talking, and that's an important step. You can't have any negotiations if you're not at least talking, so there was benefit of that. But especially with these memorandums that the two sides, these deal sheets they're both supposed to give to each other in Istanbul tomorrow, according to the Associated Press, the deal that the Ukraine side is offering is so far off of any terms that the Russians could accept that it's pretty clear that the two sides are moving further apart. They're not moving closer together. So I don't expect any outcome at all from these talks tomorrow, because Russia's deal sheet is probably going to be something that the Ukraine side would never agree to. So I think this is just kind of a pro forma thing, and it's just the fighting is going to continue on.
Lieutenant Colonel, in November 2024, when Ukraine was given that green light to target deep inside Russia, and that time Russia responded with those arresting missiles which rained down like meteors on top of Ukraine. The entire world saw those visuals. Now, within days of those range restrictions being lifted, we've seen this attack from the Ukrainian side deep inside Russia. What kind of a response should one expect from Russia? Because the bear has been poked now very hard.
That's true, and I think that's the biggest concern that I have from the Ukraine side is that Russia has demonstrated use of these Oreshnik missiles, and if you have struck strategic targets, and listen, this is some pretty big deal. A lot of these Tu-95 bombers and other variants of the bombers were just parked on the row out in the open on these airfields. That's because the START treaty obligations require them to do so, just like it requires the United States to do so. And if now Russia sees that their strategic bombers are not respected in that, so now then they may move them in violation of that treaty. Likewise, simultaneously, really to get to your heart of your question is, the real question is, because these strategic targets were struck, what will Russia do? It doesn't seem likely to me that they would not strike anything deeper inside of Ukraine. But then again, they may say we're going to continue on with this methodical pressure until we end up buckling the Ukraine army. But I think it's also quite possible that you could see some Oreshniks hit some big high-value targets, maybe even in Kiev in the coming days.
Right, and of course it's very interesting because we picked up that topic of how U.S. has allowed this, and now German Chancellor, he had also allowed that, okay, you can actually go ahead and we're going to allow you to strike deep inside Russia, and this attack happened. Very interesting how all of this happened, but thank you so much for joining on the show and giving your perspective.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.